Garland Nixon is the wisest, the smartest, and the coolest of our American commentators. It's always a pleasure to see him here on the mother of all talk shows. To talk us through some pretty dramatic developments, Garland. I mean, it's not every day a banana republic decides to take the lead candidate in the election off the ballot so that he can't stand for election, especially when you're claiming that democracy is on the ballot paper. Decency, as Mrs. Biden said, is on the ballot paper. Talk us through what's happened.
Yes, the state of Colorado, their highest court has ruled in favor of plaintiffs that are arguing that former President Donald Trump can't be on at this point in time, the primary ballot against the other Republicans because he is an insurrectionist. He was involved in an insurrection. What people need to know is that the roots of this particular law come from the Civil War. After the Civil War, a number of Confederate politicians returned to Washington, D.C. and said, okay, we're ready to come back and hold our seats in Congress. And of course, there were laws passed that no, you were involved in an insurrection and you shouldn't be allowed to hold office again. And that certainly has never been used in this manner before. I would have to suspect that the chances of this passing muster in the Supreme Court aren't really very strong because there's no factual basis in the argument that former President Trump was actually involved in an insurrection. He has not been formally charged with anything, with being involved in an insurrection. He hasn't been found guilty of being involved in an insurrection. And there has never, other than rhetorically, it has never been legally proven that an insurrection occurred. So I don't think that goes past the Supreme Court. However, the consequence, if it did, would be pretty grand because there are other states that are attempting to do this, to utilize the same law and do the same thing. Keep in mind also that Colorado is a blue state that President Trump is not likely to win. It's only for the primary anyway, so it's not as consequential as one would think. However, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the likelihood is that you would start to see those types of things happen in some of the more conservative controlled states. And we'd end up with an election where Joe Biden could run in blue states, Donald Trump could only run in the red states. And the absurdity of this empire would be pronounced and obvious for the world to see.
Yeah, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. What's to stop red states taking Joe Biden off the ballot paper because he's been impeached or is about to be impeached, or because of what he did in Ukraine, or for any number of reasons? And then we won't have an election at all, will we?
Exactly. And, if you've been paying attention to Joe Biden recently, this reeks of desperation. Joe Biden recently told us that, October 7th was 65 years ago and that his Irish Catholic late father was wandering around a kibbutz then. I mean, the guy has no clue, what's going on at this point. And it just seems that his party is so desperate that they'll try any means necessary to try to get this guy elected. And to be quite honest, I got to give him credit, because the only way Joe Biden is going to get elected is if he's running against an empty ballot. Otherwise, he loses to pretty much anybody.
Now, you mentioned that this was Colorado's highest court. So when you say Supreme Court, do you mean the Colorado Supreme Court or the Supreme Court in Washington?
No, I mean the Colorado Supreme Court, because this particular case had been appealed up to the Supreme Court of Colorado. So they had found in favor of it, and now it goes out of the state. They used the Colorado Constitution to make the argument that he couldn't be on the ballot. Keep in mind, at this point, it is the ballot for the primaries. It would still, even that would make a difference, because Donald Trump's lead in the United States throughout the states in the Republican primary is so pronounced that it's not going to change an outcome, but it certainly would be used to we could see that spreading and change the dynamics of elections in the United States forever.
Yeah, it's already spread to California. The district attorney has been tasked with examining whether the same thing could happen there. Now, California is, of course, a state of vastly greater consequence in every way than Colorado. What's the chances, another blue state, what's the chances of them doing the same thing?
If this passes muster in the Supreme Court, I would say the chances are high that a number of blue states would then attempt to do the same thing. Now, if you look at the actual states, I can see where it would could potentially hurt the Democrats more than Republicans for this reason. The Democrats have been able to turn a few of the southern states, North Carolina, Georgia, during some of the recent elections, and there's a huge red state, Texas, which the Democrats have been eyeing, and due to demographic changes, feel like they have a chance to win at some point in the future. So if the red states, particularly these states that have been teetering on the edge of going to the Democrats, decide that they want to step in and do the same thing, it could have a dramatic effect on the Democrats. But then, as questionable as our electoral process is already, this would really be the final nail in the coffin, because if in fact the winner of the election depends on which state is blocking which candidate out, it gets to a point where there's no point in people voting anymore. That this is just lawfare, and rather than having to do what they do with the machines now, it'll be out in the open.
Yeah, you might get another civil war, and Trump can be Robert E. Lee, and the Confederates might win this time. So you better look out. The situation with Ukraine. Tell us about that, Garland. Blinken has announced an early Christmas present for Zelensky, that there's nothing in the post after Christmas Day. It's over, isn't it?
Possibly. I mean, it's certainly possible that sometime after the first of the year that the Democrats and the Republicans come together and they have another tranche of money to supposedly give to Ukraine. As most people know, most of it goes to Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, et cetera, right here in the United States, and what's left to be stolen by the Ukrainian oligarchs is then shipped overseas. But it certainly appears as though the attention of the U.S. empire has shifted from Ukraine to the Middle East. They're done with this, and they will do as history tells us that they have done in whether it's in Vietnam or Afghanistan. When they tire of a particular conflict, they just walk away. As you know, the Ukrainian government, the Kiev regime, is now speaking of conscripting up to 500,000 people, including, well, they've said they're not going to be women, but teenagers and people older than either of us. That's kind of frightening. But the issue becomes, if they conscript another 500,000 people, what are they going to arm them with? They have they're about to run out of ammunition. And I think even more importantly, there are people getting poisoned. There are people getting Christmas presents and birthday presents with live grenades. It certainly appears as though the Kiev regime is on the border of some kind of internal collapse or civil war on its own.
Now, Yemen. That's your next port of call. I don't know if anybody in Washington knows anything about Yemen. I myself have studied it, followed it for 50 years, more than 50 years, ever since I saw the Scottish soldiers in their kilts getting their bare backsides handed to them by the Yemeni people, after taking control and murdering a significant number of Yemenis in the port of Aden, the Crater district. I've never forgotten it. The skirl of the pipes, the swirl of the kilts, and the gunfire shooting down unarmed Yemeni people, but the Yemeni people prevailed over British imperial control, and they have prevailed over the coalition involving the US and Britain, but led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They have prevailed over that. They have for 10 years been fighting. Now they're going to fight Joe Biden. How's that likely to go?
Well, it appears to me that the Ansar Allah, the Yemen leadership, has created a dynamic for the U.S. empire that I would analogize to quicksand. One thing we know about a person who gets stuck in quicksand, the more they struggle, the quicker they seal their own doom. And what's going on now is if the U.S. decides they want to attack Yemen, if they want to, then Yemen has some options, which is to attack U.S. ships, which in that instance, and here's what's important, because I used to be involved in insurance. If you have insurance, what almost all insurance policies say, they will not pay in a war zone. In the event that a firefight starts, shall we say, with missiles between the U.S. in the Red Sea area, the U.S. and Yemen, all of the shipping companies will then have to face the reality that their insurances have declared the area a war zone, and they will have no insurance in a war zone. So if the U.S. attacks Yemen, they, by their own actions, close the entire area to all shipping, not just shipping that goes to Israel. And of course, they create the possibility that Yemen could attack infrastructure in some of the local oil-producing countries. So this is, as I said, it's quicksand. If the U.S. empire decides to struggle, they're going to go down faster.
Have they walked into this with their eyes wide shut? I mean, has there been any debate in the U.S.? Does anybody know anything about the Yemenis and their capabilities?
Not really. This does get somewhat reported on the mainstream media, but yeah, there's a lot of propaganda involved. I think one of the interesting dynamics here also is the fact that the leaders of Yemen are acting in concert with the population. If you read and research this, you'll find that the population of Yemen is supporting their leaders completely. In fact, most of the people around the Middle East are supporting Yemen, and most of the people, a lot of people around the world are supporting what Yemen is doing because most people want a ceasefire. While on the other side, Joe Biden is not only not consulting with his people, 76 to 80% of the constituents of his own party, if you look at the various polls, oppose what he's doing. His polls are in the trash. He's at 34% right now. Not that I'm sure he really knows that, but hey, I'm sure his handlers at least know that. So he is going against the wishes of the people in his own party, in his own country, and he is now in opposition to people who are wholly unified against the U.S. empire's machinations in the Middle East.
Now, lastly, Garland, and I'm always grateful for your time, I just read out some breaking news about Catholic nuns being murdered in Gaza this evening. The convent of Mother Teresa, the convent founded by Mother Teresa, her nuns, was blown up yesterday. Parishioners were killed in the Holy Family Church at Christmas time by Israeli snipers. The Pope has become more and more bold in his denunciation of them. The mild-mannered Cardinal Nichols of the Westminster Cathedral was asked on Sky News, so you don't accept the word of the Israel Defense Force? And the Cardinal answered in a word, no. So just how reckless does this whole thing have to become before someone calls a halt to it? Any straws in the wind in Washington on that?
Not at this point. And, I would argue that what's going on now in Gaza is a bookend. On one end, the first bookend was, in fact, the beginning of the U.S. empire, which was started with what? They genocided the indigenous population. They committed slavery and all types of terrible things for many, many years. And then they argued that was the old us. That was before we were enlightened like we are. We're totally different now, and we would never do these kinds of of things again. And now here is the bookend. The Gaza conflict, if you will, genocide, whatever you want to call it, is the bookend on the end of the U.S. empire. The U.S. empire now has no moral standing in the world. Not even the leadership and the ruling elite in the U.S. empire does not even have moral standing amongst the people of this nation. So I think that what's going on in Gaza, this is it. This is game over. No more Tony Blinken running around the world pointing at other people saying that they are committing human rights activities or they're authoritarians. All of that stuff will be laughed at by the world. This is the final chapter in the precipitous downfall of an empire that's been involved in just terrible actions for its entire existence.
Amen to all that. Merry Christmas to you. Garland Nixon, thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.